Hey, it's Adam from the Brisbane Channel, and while the Brisbane Channel is generally a non-political channel, which is themed around all things Brisbane, there's no escaping the fact that we have an election coming up this coming weekend, and it affects everybody in Brisbane. And it just so happens that one of the videos that I'm currently working on youth crime, well, that's one of the major issues that has been discussed as part of this election. So I thought, well, I'm not going to finish that video in time to put it out before the election. It's not a politically motivated video anyway, but the people who I've been interviewing and speaking with who have some involvement in the youth justice system each have their own opinions that they have expressed during those interviews that may be relevant to people working out who am I going to vote for in the election. Now, I'm not going to give any editorial comment, or I'm not going to favor any political party in what I select. Basically, I'm just taking any of the instances where people I've interviewed have mentioned policies or parties in their interview, and I'm putting those parts into this video, and I'm just going to play them one after the other so that you can look at all the different points of view to come up with a more well-rounded impression when it comes to youth crime and the different policies in the eyes of advocates.
So I'm Trudy from Voice for Victims. I am a victim advocate. Voice for Victims was established to give victims a voice and also to advocate for victims where they were being let down by the system. I live in the Youth Justice Minister's electorate and I've got plenty of junk mail spruiking the different things that the government have put forward as election promises. There is nothing in there for victims and nothing in there for combating youth crime. We haven't seen any announcements from Labor on youth crime and how they're going to fix it, other than we've got a safety plan and it's working. Now, I don't think that their safety plan is working. When we attended the safety bill forum earlier this year, every expert that sat in front of them said that there is nothing in that community safety plan that's going to make this community safer. And you could check back through the records. It wasn't until the youth justice staff and the police arrived that there was any mention that this was going to make Queenslanders safer. The LNP, obviously, they've announced their adult crime, adult time. They've also announced 40 million for victims, and they have offered to work with victims in making sure that the victim service is improved. They recognise, and we've spoken to them about the holes that we see in victim assist at the moment, and the gaps where victims are continuing to fall through and feel unsupported. We just want to be able to put victims first.
My name's Katherine Hayes. I'm the CEO of the Youth Advocacy Centre. The Youth Advocacy Centre, known as YAC, has been around for just over 40 years. We're a community legal centre and we provide legal advice to young people in the youth justice system. We also provide wraparound support for young people and their families, anyone who's experiencing domestic violence in that family context for young people, homelessness support and bail support. It's really frustrating because it's such a polarising argument. It's seen as you're either on the victim's side or you're on the perpetrator's side. There doesn't seem to be any common ground, but there is common ground, and we have productive relationships with a lot of victims groups, and the biggest cohort that is the victim of youth crime are young people themselves. In addition to being the victims of youth crime, young people are the victims of other crime, and it's a really interesting example is, it's a horrific example, is in Cairns. A couple of years ago, the police busted a child sex ring. There were about 7 or 8, I think, adults who were preying on vulnerable child safety kids, plying them with drugs and alcohol and sexually abusing them. So a lot of those kids have now ended up in the youth justice system. They were vulnerable, neglected by child safety, and now are in the youth justice system. So they're those kids that are demonised by everybody. They're committing crimes, and we don't want crimes committed, but they're demonised. And at the same time, those adults who were part of the child sex ring got sentences of 2 to 3 years, and there was no outcry about them. And what they've done is worse than what these kids are doing. So for me, I don't understand the hate and the vitriol that's poured on these kids. There's just whenever we do any sort of high profile advocacy, for example, we had a young person that was beaten up in one of the watch houses and it was on the 7:30 report, and then we get messages saying, if this kid's done the wrong thing, he deserves everything he gets. And it just, I don't understand why there's just such hate. And I don't think the media helps by polarising the debate. So Barry, I think it's important that people need to understand if young people are becoming involved in the youth justice system, they almost always have suffered some level of trauma. There are always exceptions. We've got a couple of kids that don't fit that mould, but almost all of the others have either suffered domestic and family violence, neglect, and other traumas, parents in and out of jail and things like that. Almost all of them. So that's the bit I find frustrating.
I'm Natalie Merlehan. I was involved in the incident that unfortunately took the lives of Matt, Kate and Miles in Alexandra Hills on the 26th of January 2021.
Natalie also has a background in criminology, and she's a member of IMAC, which is the Independent Ministerial Advisory Council, which is a bunch of representatives who've been brought together to give advice in looking at how we can reform the justice system, particularly the youth justice system.
Look, it's obviously a really topical thing at the moment with the election imminent. I have no particular political persuasion, and obviously through the advocacy work that I do, we've met with all different arms of government, and it's been interesting to see that given the amount of meetings we've had with all the different sides, the only people that have come out so far to make a promise on giving victims more rights and trying to look at effective ways to decrease youth especially becoming adult offenders is the Liberals. So I mean, I'd love for all the parties to come out and have a stance on that. I think as a victim, for me, that's really important to understand how they're going to address the issue long term. But yeah, so far we've only seen the Liberals, and I believe that pretty much all the announcements are now made and everything's kind of wrapped, and that now that pre-polling is opened.
Keith Hamburger, former Director General of the Queensland Corrective Services Commission.
Keith is also a member of IMAC.
If we do a reset camp, and I don't know enough about them to be, I'm not being critical, I'm just sort of raising the issue about them, and we're talking about weeks, for these complex needs these children have got, they're not being fed at home, they're not going to school, all this sort of stuff. That's not the way to go about it, in my humble opinion at this point, until I know more about it. So the model I'm talking about, we empower the local community and all of those services, whatever they are, and there might be room for a reset camp if there's some kids that just need a few weeks to sort of shake them up and say, hey, you know, we can get you back on track here. But it's got to be delivered, and the local community got to be empowered to do that and rewarded to do it by getting jobs in the community. We build in a surplus in the fee that they're charging the government, and that surplus gets reinvested into the community under a concept called justice reinvestment, where we can buy sporting equipment, they can do things for kids or whatever with that money. So we're actually strengthening the community in two ways: jobs for local people and putting money back into pro-social responses. So I think we've had too many of these little bright ideas of reset camps or just a bush camp in isolation or whatever. It's got to be brought into a holistic response under a community empowerment model. Tough on crime is a very sad statement by politicians. I hate that when I hear that, because then they're just not thinking about being effective.
My name is Debbie Kilroy, and I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Sisters Inside. Yeah, Sisters Inside's an independent community organisation that exists to advocate for criminalised and imprisoned women and girls, and we do so alongside them. So basically what that means is we are an organisation that's driven by formerly incarcerated women, and being one of the founders when I was in prison back in the late 80s, early 90s. Having social workers and the Juvenile Aid Bureau, which was a new bureau of the police, convincing my parents to sign me away to put me in a prison. You know, like, who does that, seriously, for wagging school? But when I say who does that, I'll tell you who's going to do that right now, and that's the LNP, because it's one of their policies that have stated very clearly that children who are targeted, they're going to target, who may be siblings of a child who is going through the system, and that younger sibling is truanting will actually go into one of their residential prisons. And I call it a prison because it's actually, you're not allowed out of it 24 hours, 7 days a week. Let's use the language, the real language, the truth of the language of these policies, because it's just furphy, it's just marketing. And what it is expanding the prison industrial complex in homes in our communities. And there will be so many children like me, 50 years on, the same policy, to be locked up because you're truaning school. And under this whole lie of community safety. And so to have an analysis and understanding how that's operating, it's clear that abolition is the only answer that actually can end harm in our community. It's not locking children and people in cages, because they're really violent places. And if you're put in a violent place and you're violated, you will be violent. There's no other way, because you have to survive in that violence. And the only way to survive violence is actually to be more violent. This hashtag, adult crime, adult time, is horrifying. The US has gone down that road 20, 30 years ago, and it's a fundamental failure. And here we have the LNP spruiking this because they've caused, and the media has caused, so much fear in the community over the last number of years about children, when we know the evidence shows that the crime rate has come drastically down for children, but we're still targeting children, and they are targeting children to get themselves voted. I'm not saying that Labor has been any better in a sense, but they are better. And the most recent policy announcement, which is a game changer, I believe, is actually feeding every child in a public school. I know that private schools are going off about that, but private schools, people pay to go to private schools. You have money. We're talking about children that go to public schools. And what the LNP and those that support the LNP are saying, we're not a nanny state. If a parent can't feed your child, then the state should come and remove your child. Well, I'm sorry. The cost of living is going up and up and up and up. That the families that we support, and the girls who are with their families, cannot afford food, 3 meals a day. So we are providing that to them through donations that people donate to us. But this is a game changer if the state provides food. Children won't feel ashamed going to school with no food. They will actually be happy to go to school because they know that everyone's getting a feed, right? So it's everybody, no matter who you are, get fed. It's also about community, to build that interaction with children, and also with the school, adults, teachers, whoever they are, to actually be able to have a meal together and enjoy that, to have fun, to feel good about yourself, build your confidence, and then build your creativity and allow every child to dream a dream and make that come true, and not be worried that I haven't got food, I'm starving, I'm ashamed to go to school, so I'm out on the streets, and then I get caught up and collide with police and get caged. This is a game changer. Feeding children it's so simple, but it's actually brilliant. We took 3 little ones to Parliament House recently, and the Premier showed them around, and they loved it. And one of them was a little 10-year-old, right, that we support. And she started, because she's running with the older kids' relations, and had got into a little bit of trouble, right? Had been reprimanded, and it's like, okay, what's happening? Let's call her Mary. Okay, Nan's struggling with money, has a whole heap of kids in the house, so we're providing food. But they're ashamed, they were ashamed to tell us that they didn't have food because they're not at school, and we could see that they're not going to school. It's like, what's happening? Why don't you get back at school? Oh, well, we're ashamed, we've got no food, so we don't want to go. So we would provide food. And it was really interesting, because what had actually happened was, when the kids were there, they went to the cafeteria, and the Premier bought them a sandwich each. And one of the little one didn't eat her sandwich. And the Premier said to her, it's okay, you can eat your sandwich. And she said something to him like, no, I'm going to keep it because my nan's hungry at home, and left it. He had to walk away because he had never been, I think, confronted with something, and it still confronts me, to think that a child is hungry, but I'm going to keep it wrapped to take to my nana. He walked away because you could see that it had an impact on him, and then he'd come back and he bought another sandwich and said, okay, you take that to Nan. and that's for you, which was beautiful. And it shifted, I think, him in the reality, because a lot of these people in power have no idea about what's happening to children and their lives and what's happening in their households around poverty and around food. So providing lunches is a game changer, and it's not a new thing. It's been happening for decades. Like I remember, you know, in the 80s, like I was living in England because my husband was playing football there, right? And the school, because England's cold, it's winter, she could go to school. Every child got a free hot lunch. It was perfect. You didn't have the stress. Children didn't have the stress to worry that they didn't have food because they knew that they would all sit together in a communal room and have a hot meal each. It was the best thing. And, you know, her and her little friends there love that. It actually allowed them to connect, and they ate together. We know what it's like, right? To have a feed together with our friends, with our family. And that's what it brings together as a school, instead of isolating individual children where they're pulled apart and shamed and bullied because of poverty and because they don't have food. That's a game changer. That's an abolitionist practice tool, is to feed people. So I don't know if the Premier knows that, but that's an abolitionist practice. Yeah. The work that we do is work that works, because those children know that we are here today when they're 10 and in a decade when they're 20. So I know little ones who are 10-year-olds who are now in their 20s having their own children and being fantastic mothers because of the support. Yep, it took some speed bumps to get us there. Like any child, we know what teenagers are like. Those of us who had children, those of us are teachers with, you know, teenagers in school. We know what that's like. It's just riding the wave with them and not letting them down. How difficult it is for adults, you know, but no. The LNP use them as targets now to be elected. And it's the most gutless form of politics that I've ever seen in my life. But we see it over and over again. And it's got to end, because these are our children. They are our future. If we want our future to be okay, let's start treating our children okay. Yeah. The policies that's going to be implemented, if the LNP get elected, are going to be horrifying and have a most harmful impact on children for the rest of their lives. And like I said, free lunches at school is a game changer. That's where we got to go, you know. Look after everybody, not just ourselves as individuals.
So that's all the relevant bits from the interviews that I conducted so far for the video that I'm putting together. The full uncut, unedited interviews will be available on the Brisbane Channel to channel members. So if you're interested in seeing the full thing that they had to say, the full context, then it's definitely going to be available. And apart from that, stay tuned for the video on youth crime, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And yeah, subscribe if you're not already. Make sure you got all notifications ticked, and I'll see you in the next video. Good luck with the voting too.